Hello and welcome to Sounding Board, a community access television production of Seroptimus International of Novato. My name is Madeline Peters and I'll serve as moderator today. And our guests here are Ann Johnson and Vicki Campbell, and the topic is on multiple sclerosis, or MS. But before we learn more about MS, I'd like to mention that Seroptimus International is an organization whose mission is to advance the status of women and girls, both globally and locally. So again, back to today's program. We have, as I said, Ann and Vicki here, and I'll open by having Ann first tell a little bit about herself, and then Vicki. And we're kind of calling the show MS 101 as an introduction. It's like an awareness to the public of what MS is all about. So a little bit of background. Ann, why don't you provide us with a little bit of information, and then I'll go to you, Vicki.
Sure. I've been working for the National MS Society, the Northern California chapter, for the last 5 years. I work in the community. I'm community development manager, and essentially the privilege of my position is working with our members with MS in any capacity in the ways that the MS Society reaches out to people with programs and services. We drive change through advocacy as well as fundraising to support our MS research.
Okay, all right. So Vicki, a little bit about you.
Well, I've been diagnosed with MS for about 12 years, and currently I co-facilitate a self-help group here in Marin County, and we meet in Corte Madera.
Okay, all right. Well, I really appreciate, first of all, I appreciate the initial conversation we had several weeks ago and the background information that you provided for me. I'm very interested in hearing your stories and sharing your information with a wider audience. Ann, why don't I start with you? Like, can you be a little bit more specific about what MS is?
Absolutely. You know, a lot of people, first of all, confuse MS with perhaps something like muscular dystrophy. Mm-hmm. And what we need to clarify is MS is an autoimmune disorder that affects the central nervous system. And that is a very unpredictable, it's often disabling, and it interrupts the flow of information, not only within the brain, but from the brain to the body. Because the autoimmune disorder, it is attacking, it passes through the blood-brain barrier and it attacks the myelin sheath, the fatty tissue that's around the nerve fibers. And once it is attacked and it creates scarring and it can break down the nerve fibers, that often in itself is what causes some of the lasting disabling impacts of an MS. However, each person is very different. It looks very different depending on where they are attacked within the central nervous system, the brain and the spine. And often people can go for many years and be doing quite well and all of a sudden find that they're out of commission. So Vicki can talk a little bit more about that also with some of the members in our group, but for the most part, MS is very different for each and every person.
Well, again, Ann, so I understand what you said just in terms of how it's different and the process itself. Vicki, I wonder if you would just kind of add to what is it like for you? I mean, I think that's very bold and brave of you to be an advocate and be a spokesperson and to really kind of share your own perspective on what it's like.
Right. Well, I happen to have a form of MS called relapsing remitting MS. So sometimes you can relapse and have an exacerbation or an attack. And in other words, you can have your symptoms show up, or it could remit, stop for a while, or just stay in, if you're taking one of the disease-modifying drugs, it might halt the symptoms altogether for a while. And I happen to be on one of the disease-modifying drugs. Some people are not on drugs at all. They choose alternative methods of treatment. And so there's all kinds of things that can be done to help the symptoms. There's no cure for MS, but there are a lot of disease-modifying drugs, and there's symptom management drugs.
And so you've been able to manage the symptoms effectively in the 12 years that you've had MS.
Yes.
I can imagine, though, it's, you know, it's like it's unpredictable just from what you said and what you talked about, and you almost don't know from one day to the next what you're going to have to face, and then be in a frame of mind to go, okay, I understand now this is happening. I think I mentioned when I spoke with you earlier, I had a teacher with whom I worked who had MS, and it was amazing. Just one day she's fine, another day she's in bed, another day she's hospitalized, another day she's in a wheelchair, another day she's fine again.
Yeah. Exactly.
It doesn't affect everybody that way, but it can.
Exactly. 80%, almost 80% of the people that have MS have relapsing remitting. It's probably one of the most common.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, it's 80. I think it's 80 to 85% have the most. So it's most common form, and many of the treatments are available to help people with relapsing remitting. There's primary progressive MS, which we're still doing an awful lot of research on in efforts to try treatment, and progressive MS, in which when somebody is diagnosed with MS, it is within every relapse they become more and more disabled. And so that's why if you go, for example, to our walk this April, you'll see people from a variety of different ages. It's a prime of life disease between the ages really about 20 to 50, meaning that's when people are typically diagnosed, and it's hitting the prime of life. But you'll see folks that are very young that may be using wheelchairs or mobility assistants, and other people who've had it for 20 years and they've never missed a day of work. So again, what's really important for people to understand is that when you meet somebody who has MS, learn a little bit about it, but find out what their experience is, and even though they may not look like they have a disability or they have a hidden disability, it's important to take in their experience and not jump to conclusions because you knew somebody else with MS who had a very different experience.
But your word choice is very interesting, a hidden disability. You know, so it's the hidden disability. It's also unpredictable. So hidden because so someone might not say, oh, that person obviously is coping with something. And then, or the person who has MS, you know, either the mild forms are in remission or not being able to predict one day to the next. So it's like that's a confusing state to be in. So it's important for someone like me to understand the MS and how it's manifested. As you said, 80% is active and in remission, or
85% have relapsing remitting type of MS.
I see. Okay.
Yes. And so exactly. For example, fatigue is crushing fatigue is a symptom with MS.
Okay.
If you went out for somebody for a cup of coffee, you may not realize that's what they're struggling with. And so in that way, it's a hidden disability.
I see. Then the fundraising for research, you said there's a walk in April. So it just seems as though there is no cure at this point. What is going on in terms of how MS is diagnosed and treated now as opposed to, say, 50 years ago?
Well, it's amazing the progress that has been made in the last at least 2 to 3 decades. We have now 9 different treatments and medications that are out, from injectables to now recently an oral medication that can help people you know, deal with the autoimmune disorder. And so that was something maybe 20, 30 years ago, MS was essentially something that was it was just determined to be a disabling disease
that people had to live with,
and that exactly. And even for the MS Society, a lot of the fundraising not only goes towards the treatment, but it also goes for what people are living with disease today in programs and services. For example, with the National Home Office and the 50 different chapters. 2011 alone, we had over $164 million collectively going towards programs and services and professional development. Last year, we had over $40 million go towards worldwide research projects. So that was over 365 research projects. So there was an awful lot of happening in research today, which is creating almost like a Pandora's box, an explosion of different ways that MS can be treated. One way that we're looking at is how to repair myelin sheath.
Right.
Some things that we looked at several years ago was the diagnosis process of MS. So many people were misdiagnosed or were not diagnosed very early, and therefore weren't able to get the treatments in the early stages of the disease, which could have slowed down the progress of disability. So these are all very important pieces of the puzzle that may one day lead us to a world very free of MS, but for right now we're seeing a lot of progress in the research and the development.
Well, that's definitely encouraging. I wonder, Vicki, if I could just ask you, how has it changed for you in terms of when you were first diagnosed, like over the last, say, you said 12 years or something like that?
Well, first of all, for the first 10 years, before the 12 years, before I was diagnosed, they couldn't diagnose me. They couldn't figure it out. And so that took about 10 years of back and forth going to different doctors and trying to find out what was going on. And then once I got the diagnosis, they did have medications available at that point, because that was 12 years ago. I have changed. It has really helped me a lot. There's things I can do now that I couldn't do in the very beginning.
But I can imagine that must have been a very frustrating 10 years of you trying
Extremely.
to cope with what's going on here and not getting any answers. I mean, it's certainly welcome that you are on a treatment path now. And I think the big thing that strikes me is when I listen to what you just said is you're on a path and a regimen to slow the progression of the disability.
Right.
Well, wouldn't that have been helpful if the diagnosis
Started
happened?
earlier.
I know,
Yes.
I know. But at least, you know, you're on a positive path.
Yes.
And so that the work that both of you are doing is really to kind of make people aware and also promote ways to cope with MS and get people the treatments that they need and be a support to them. Because I can imagine that's another part of it too. So you kind of touched on this, is that those people who are living with MS today, you have the National MS Society. Can you talk a little bit about, you said specifically the research was on looking at ways to kind of repair the myelin sheath and that may be a pretty specific area, but just other things that are going on. A couple of things that may be promising for people who have MS.
Well, for another example is the role of rehabilitation. So many of our members who are having mobility issues, let's say 2 decades ago, doctors would have told people to stay quiet and not move around, that they want to necessarily, treat themselves as if they were ill. And that's not the case now at all. I mean, we're recommending that people move every day.
And exercise.
And exercise and yoga and stretching as means to tame spasticity or, keep functional, keep, healthy function. And so those are just some of the different ways in which we're looking at wellness and promoting wellness, looking at diet, looking at the role of the inflammation in the diet. Those are all some of those things that are being studied that are opening up possibilities. But the one thing that I find really interesting, and Vicki I think can speak to this, is one of the things that our chapter does is it funds the self-help groups all throughout the chapter, well, nationwide. But within our chapter, really our self-help group leaders like Vicki and Anita are really the tentacles in the community. They're the people living with MS. They're out there serving as examples of all the different ways that they solve problems, and they have found ways to support one another. And so I need to point that out. It's truly a member organization, and the voice of the members for the National MS Society have an impact every day on the lives of people with MS. So I can say that money makes a huge difference in research and advancement, our programs and services. We do professional development for doctors as well as programs in the community, but also our self-help groups and member involvement and participation drives that organization. It is the heart of this organization.
Well, see, this creates a different kind of lens from me right now, looking at the information component, but also the leadership component. And it's like, I'm seeing those as parallel tracks in the organization. Obviously, it's much more complex than that. But that information and awareness, and you're sharing, you know, what the community leaders do, really is a very strong and necessary part of moving forward and understanding and living with MS. The other thing that struck me is, you know, within the last, as you said, 20 or 30 years, you know, what the recommendation was for people who had MS 20 or 30 years ago, continue being sedentary, or don't risk whatever without people understanding whatever that was. It's just amazing. So there's been a lot of changes, a lot of misinformation, probably a lot of misinformation that the organization has had to correct.
Exactly. Thank you for pointing that out, because the professional development and working with neurologists, and one of the things that the National MS Society has done is helped work with global information and the MS Care Consortium as a means to not only being part of or at the table and getting that information, finding out what's happening with clinical studies, but also seeing neurologists, general practitioners, and educating them about MS as well, because as Vicki said, especially early stages of the disease, we saw a lot of misdiagnosis, or doctors who didn't understand the disease. And so therefore people weren't on a treatment path, or they weren't necessarily, they were just kind of lost. And so we've closed those gaps a lot, especially with MRI scanning, and this type of global consortium that's working collaboratively is also getting the word out to make this disease much less mysterious disease. It's easier to recognize, it's easier to get people to help, and we're very proud that we're part of that. But again, our members have done a lot in the way of MS awareness and education, the kinds of things that Vicki is just talking about now.
Well, Vicki, I'd like you to speak to that, because you are a community leader. You're that very important outreach, living with MS in the community and being a community activist, and helping people become familiar with MS, and also what a diagnosis of MS means, and that whole thing about treatment plans. So could you share your, just share your story?
Sure. I run the group here in Marin County with Anita, and she and I have been running it for about 10 years now here in Marin County in Corte Madera. But there's self-help groups all over the Bay Area. And our group is around 20 to 40 people. We meet once a month on a Saturday in Marin County. People can find out about any help of self-help groups, or connecting with a group, by just calling the MS Society. They can call 1-800-FIGHT-MS and find out about it, and also find out about other free classes, lectures, and ways to get help. But our group meets every other month. We have a speaker, could be a neurologist, a physical therapist, a nutritionist, it could be a yoga instructor, it could be adaptive yoga. And so we vary it, and we've had a different subject every other month for the last 10 years. And so we bring our group together. Some of the best meetings, though, is where we just sit around and share what's been happening in our lives with the MS. And it's very helpful for people not to feel alone, that there's other people going through this.
That always seems to be the case, and you know, that people realize whatever it is they're struggling with, that being able to communicate with someone else who has an understanding, and it's almost as though you get to pool your knowledge. You're creating, you know, it's the emotional support, definitely. Obviously, people need that.
Like what doctor you're seeing, what treatment are you having, or what vitamins are you taking? What does your doctor recommend for vitamins or nutrition?
Right, right. And then probably the kind of reflections that people have over, you know, what they have tried and what they've learned from one another.
Yes.
It's sort of like the informal medical university.
Exactly, exactly.
Exactly, breaking the isolation. And the one thing I've also noticed, because with relapsing remitting, as you said, you know, the exacerbations are very unpredictable. And so somebody can be shut down really without notice. And the one thing I've noticed is the people that are attending self-help groups, have a tendency to be there for one another. You see people bringing over the meals. You see people coming in to step in and help one another. And that's a big part of it.
Well, so just by that, what they're doing is they're changing sort of like the social interaction and the social awareness and understanding, as well as the networking among the people who are battling various stages of MS.
Exactly.
So it's like that's a huge service. That's a huge. So they're just being there for one another, because then that people stepping in to do that may take the burden off of whatever family members or what, again, it's like another area of support.
Exactly.
And I can imagine it's empowering to, and I'll ask you this too, Vicki, it's empowering to be able to, use your own experience to then help someone else.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I do need to ask you, is that how did you decide to become a community activist? By a community you're a community leader.
Thank you. There was one of our current existing leader at the time, co-facilitator, had decided to move on, and so she kind of recruited Anita and me to just help out at a meeting, and maybe bring in a speaker or bring in some information. And so it just kind of started very slowly. And before I knew it, we were all of a sudden running the group.
So that was very careful planning on this facilitator's
I don't know if she
part.
planned it. It just worked out. So we helped her for quite a few meetings, and then it just fell into it.
Well, when you think back on that process, what are the things that come to mind for you? What's important for you? Because obviously you're doing this because you enjoy doing it. So this is a different experience, I can imagine, than maybe you thought yourself in.
Well, yeah, sometimes I'd go to a meeting and someone would say, oh, well, I've tried that, and I never would have thought of that, or I never would have gotten that from a doctor's visit, let's say. And so some of the best things I've gotten is just by sharing from what people just sit around the table and tell what's going on in their lives. So
again, that informal university of information is helpful.
Yes.
What can we do to help someone with MS, Vicki?
Well, one of the things is this walk coming up in April 21st in Santa Rosa is one of the locations. But what's interesting about the walk is you don't have to walk. If you have difficulty walking, you can take the wheelchair or your walker, or you can just show up to help out and volunteer your time, maybe hand out water bottles or hand out t-shirts, which is one of the things I'll be doing. I won't be doing one of the walks. But it's a fundraising opportunity because you can get people to donate money to kind of support you going to this walk.
And it's April 21st.
21st in Santa Rosa, Maria Carrillo High School. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And but there's also walks in San Francisco, Ukiah, all over the place, all over the Bay Area.
You can visit walkmsnorcal.org.
Yes. Okay.
And so
walkmsnorcal.org.
And there's 12 walk sites. So, yeah, absolutely.
And if people want to contribute, help or contribute, so they just go through the walkmsnorcal.org, and then they can find ways.
Yes, there's different tabs.
Okay.
Yes.
We're getting to the end of close to the end of our program, but I want a chance, Anne, first you, and then Vicki, you. Is we've touched on lots of different things in this time. Are there things, a few key points that you would like to leave our audience with that you feel are really important? And Anne, I'll start with you. Something you want to emphasize, perhaps?
I would say that if you know somebody with MS and you don't know a lot about it, take the time to educate yourself so you can you can share and understand their experience. Because I think through that understanding what other people are going through, we break the isolation. And that in itself is sometimes the best thing that you can do, is let people know you understand, you took the time to care. So that was one thing I would emphasize. The other thing I would emphasize, if you're a person with MS, don't be afraid to reach out with others. Come to a program, visit a self-help group, join the walk, find other ways to connect with people that will help maybe change your frame of mind. Don't deal with the disease alone. And we find that the people who are reaching out and to connect and help strengthen the MS community by their volunteer efforts, or even just participate in it, they are understanding and weathering the elements of the disease much better.
Okay.
And so we'd love to see everybody at Walk MS, but if not, visit our website and learn more about it.
That your point's well taken. Just educate oneself about it. Yeah, that's important, and break the isolation. That's the other thing. I think people tend to isolate themselves and realize help is not that far away, but they have to ask for it. Vicki, as you think about the different conversations we've had, are there a few things that you really want to emphasize?
Well, pretty much the same thing, that you are not alone, and it's really helpful to join up with other people in just either talking to them, meeting with them. Contact the MS Society, the 1-800-FIGHT-MS, just to find out about. There's a lot of free lectures, free classes, free help, and there's also support. Like if you need, sometimes there's money available. Like if you need a walker, a mobility device, help with a direct financial assistance.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your open and honesty and your willingness to come here and to share your perspectives with us. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Vicki. Well, that's today's program on MS. My name is Madeline Peters. This is Sounding Board, a production of Seroptimus International of Novato. I'd like to thank our totally volunteer crew, and also the members of Novato Public Access Television, the Executive Director, Rick Tucker, and Leon Johnson, who work very hard to make our program successful. And again, thanks to my fellow Seroptimus members for their countless hours in working in television production. Thank you very much.